Neither give heed to fables and endless genealogies, which minister questions rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. So do.
And we're going to be dealing with why Luke has added in an extra Canaan between Arphaxad and Shelah. Now, the reason why I say an extra Canaan is because we have a legitimate Canaan, which is found in the Old Testament between Enosh and Mahalalel right here. However, this one, as I said before, is not in our Old Testament text. So why has this been inserted? So let's begin. And let's begin by considering Luke's genealogy. So as you can see here, he goes Noah, Shem, Arphaxad, Canaan, Shelah, Eber. Now the difficulty comes when we compare this to Genesis 11, in which we read Arphaxad had Shelah. There is no intervening Canaan as there is in Luke. So why has Luke added in this extra Canaan? This evidence shows conclusively that the extra name Canaan is not part of God's original word, but is due to a later copyist error. At the end of the last video, we said that this was faulty logic. Simply because the extra Canaan is not original to Genesis 11, doesn't therefore necessitate that it is within Luke due to an early copyist error. Rather, if you want to demonstrate that it is due to an early copyist error, what you have to show us is that the earliest copies of Luke omit Canaan. And Safati in his article realizes this, and he presents us evidence that in fact the earliest copies of Luke do omit this extra Canaan. So let's look at his evidence. Safati says, in fact, the earliest known extant copy of Luke, the 102-page Papyrus Codex of the Bodmer collection labeled P75, dated between AD 175 and 225, omits the extra Canaan. Thus, the reading in Luke 3:36 cannot be shown to exist before AD 220. So here Safati is arguing, based on P75, that the extra Canaan was added because it wasn't in our earliest document. Now, it's time for you, the audience, to learn something about me. I don't believe in anyone. When Safati tells me that P75 omits this extra Canaan, I don't believe him until I've seen it myself. So I went and I found P75. And here is the part of P75 that records for us the genealogy of Luke. And as you can see, it is very fragmentary. Very fragmentary. So fragmentary, I don't think you can make a conclusive argument based on it. He says that P75 omits the extra Canaan. Well, it looks like P75 omits a lot, simply because it has been broken down so much. So this makes me suspicious of whether or not Safati is correct in using P75 as evidence. So I wanted to find if there was anyone else more credible than Safati who uses P75 for arguing that the earliest copies of Luke omit Canaan. And in fact, there is. Bock, in his commentary on Luke, says the following about the extra Canaan. It is possible that the name should be omitted in Luke since P75 and D omit the name here, but have it in 337. So here is Bock, someone far smarter than you or me, and someone with far greater credentials, using P75 as evidence that the extra Canaan was not in the original document. And to this, I simply have to say I disagree with Bock. I mean, I don't like disagreeing with people smarter than me, but I simply don't see how he can use this as evidence. What makes me even more certain that Bock is wrong here is the fact that he refers to Codex D. Now, Codex D is Codex Bezae, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say that Codex D, when it comes to the genealogy of Luke, is absolutely worthless. Let me repeat that. Codex Bezae, when it comes to the genealogy of Luke, is absolutely worthless. And let me tell you why. When you're reading Codex Bezae and you come to Luke's genealogy, you find out that the author of Codex D has deleted the entirety of Luke's genealogy and slapped in its place Matthew's genealogy. That's right, you heard me correct. It deleted Luke's genealogy and put there instead Matthew's. So in other words, whoever wrote Codex D was crazy, and you cannot use crazy people as evidence for your position. So P75 is too fragmentary, and Codex D is too crazy. So this is not good evidence that the earliest copies of Luke omit the extra Canaan. So I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with Bock. And In later episodes, I'm going to talk about Codex D more because it is just too crazy to ignore. Okay, so now we have to ask the questions, well, what do our earliest manuscripts of Luke tell us about the extra Canaan? Well, let's examine them. In Codex Vaticanus, we read that Sheila had Canaan had Arpharashad. So in other words, Codex Vaticanus, a very early copy of Luke, includes the extra Canaan. When we go to Codex Sinaiticus, it goes Sheila, Canaan, Arpharashad. So again, a very early copy, Codex Sinaiticus, includes the extra Canaan. When we go to Codex Alexandrianus, we find it goes Sheila, Canaan, Arpharashad. Again, Codex Alexandrian has a very early copy, has the extra Canaan. So to me, this is all very good evidence that the extra Canaan is original in Luke. So let's go back to our three options. Now, here is my speculation. I could be wrong, but I think it's pretty good speculation. Luke sat down to write his genealogy, and he had two copies of the Septuagint in front of him. One version of the Septuagint had an extra Canaan, and the other version of the Septuagint did not have an extra Canaan. Which one was Luke going to use? Well, Luke thinks to himself, I really want there to be 77 generations in my genealogy for theological reasons. And based on this desire, Luke chooses a version of the Septuagint which has an extra Canaan, which allows him to add it here, and which therefore allows him to reach 77 generations all the way up to Jesus. This is my speculation, but I think it takes everything in consideration and is rather good. So I'm going to go with this, that Luke has purposely added Canaan. It is a deliberate insertion by Luke in order for him to achieve 77 generations. I'm really quite happy with that speculation. So now, let's go back to this slide. Is this an error? And this is a difficult question. And hopefully you've seen thus far that asking whether or not something is an error is not always a good question to ask because it's too black and white. And I think what we've seen is that Luke's insertion of an extra Canaan is done for theological reasons. Hence, can we therefore say it is strictly an error if he's done so for theological reasons? Our second issue with Luke's genealogy, so let's clear the board. We're going to be talking about Ani and Admin. These names don't appear in the Old Testament, yet Luke inserts them. So how on earth are we going to come to terms with this? So what exactly is happening in this section of Luke's genealogy? Let's now go to a different manuscript. Let's now go to Codex Alexandrianus, which has Hezron, Aram, Aminadab, and Nahshon. So here we don't have Ani, which again is just showing you that there's a huge variety when it comes to the different manuscripts at this portion. So let's just lay it out all out here. And as you can see, our three earliest manuscripts all have different readings, which is not a good thing. It is very hard for us, therefore, to determine what the original text said. With that being said, the creators of the UBS NA, Nestle Island text, tell us that it probably has Ani, Admin, and Aminadab. This is most likely what Luke originally wrote, the inclusion of Ani, Admin, and Aminadab. If you have the KJV, which is dependent upon the Textus Receptus, you're actually going to have something else. They have simply gone for Aram and Aminadab. So if we go here, you can see that the KJV, and for whatever reason the NIV, these two versions actually have no contradiction with the Old Testament because they have just gone with the Old Testament reading. This, I think, is a bit shifty because the manuscripts don't bear this out. The manuscripts tell us something far more like this, and that is why the New Revised Standard Version and the ESV both include Ani and Admin. So this is just showing you this is most likely what we're dealing with. We have Ani and Admin. Why would they be added? Why would anyone do this? More importantly, why has Luke done this to us? Why has Luke put us in this situation when we have no idea what's going on? Now, I'm going to do some speculation here. And if you've watched my previous video, hopefully you know what my speculation is going to be. Maybe you can guess it. But let's now do my speculation. Again, this is my speculation, but I think it's pretty good. All right. Luke wants to write a genealogy of Jesus. And he thinks to himself, you know what? I really want there to be 77 generations. And he's writing out his genealogy, and he comes to this section. And he realizes that if he goes Hezron, Arni, and Amminadab, he is not going to reach his 77 names. And also, that each multiple of 7 is not going to be an important character. So, Luke does something which could be perceived as a little shifty. He adds in an extra name. He adds admin between Arni and Amminadab, and by so doing, by adding this extra name, he can achieve his 77 generations. We're going to be dealing with these names here: Joseph, Judah, Simeon, and Levi. And all these names are patriarchal names, as they are all the sons of Jacob. And basically the argument is that these names are anachronistic because in this period of Luke's genealogy, we're in the pre-exilic stage. And in the pre-exilic stage, these names were not used. So is this an error? So again, we're going to be analyzing Joseph, Judah, Simeon, and Levi, all the sons of Jacob. And really what I want to do is just overwhelm you with the amount of scholars who say that this is a mistake. For instance, Strauss notes another problem in the genealogy is the presence of patriarchal names, Levi, Simeon, Judah, and Joseph, in verses 29 to 30, since there is no evidence for the pre-exilic use of these personal names in Israel. Nolan says the same thing. The patriarchal names here, Levi, Simeon, Judah, and Joseph, are not otherwise known to have been used as personal names in pre-exilic times. Furthermore, Fitzmyer notes, moreover, Luke compounds the problem in this part of the genealogy by listing 4 ancestors of Jesus who bear patriarchal names: Levi, Simeon, Judah, and Joseph. As far as can be ascertained, such names were not used by Jews in pre-exilic times and represent an anachronism that reveals why this part of the ancestry cannot otherwise be controlled. Strong words. Perhaps the strongest indictment is made by Jeremiah himself, who notes when Luke, in the early period of the kings, names in succession Joseph, Judah, Simeon, and Levi as the 6th to 9th descendants of David, it is an anachronism which proves the pre-exilic section of the genealogy to be historically worthless. They are very strong words. So hopefully that really drives home the point to you that these names don't seem to fit. Well, why has Luke done this? Luke is doing theology and not history. Hopefully you understood all of that. So let's go now to our final slide, which is that of the criteria. Is this a mistake? Well, in a certain sense it is. Based on the current evidence we have, it is an anachronism. But I'm the sort of person who always wants to give the Bible the benefit of the doubt. Benefit of the doubt. Benefit of the doubt. So, who's to say that one day we won't dig up a scroll and find that in the pre-exilic period, these names were included? So in that case, I'm going to put a question mark because further evidence might prove us wrong. I'm going to be talking about Neri and Reza. So let's clear the board and we're going to begin to talk about Neri first. So the question is, who on earth is Neri? Who is this guy? Now let's compare Luke's genealogy to the genealogy in the Old Testament. Now, in the Old Testament, we're given the royal line of descent. This is a line of kings. And as you can see, Luke does not use this genealogy from the Old Testament. He deviates from the royal lineage. Yet, despite the fact that he deviates from the royal lineage, he still incorporates Shealtiel and Zerubbabel, which now presents us with a problem because they appear out of nowhere. We know that Shealtiel's father is Jehoiakim, yet Luke, because he rejects the royal line, puts his father as someone called Neri. We simply are left speculating as to why he would do it, and none of the speculation is fruitful. So let's now go to our criteria and ask whether or not this is a contradiction. And technically it is, because you can only have one father. Perhaps a Levirate marriage is happening here. We simply do not know. But because we are clearly told in the Old Testament that Jeconiah is the father of Shealtiel, I'm inclined to call this a mistake, simply because we are given no other reason for thinking that his father is Neri. Now go to our second issue, which is the inclusion of Reza. Reza is very similar to Neri in its complication. And we're left asking, who on earth is Reza? If we compare Luke to the royal line again, in the royal line in the Old Testament, we are told who Zerubbabel's children are. For instance, in 1 Chronicles 3:19 to 24, we're told that the sons of Zerubbabel were Meshuliah, Hananiah, their sister was Shemaiah, his 5 other sons were these guys. So we're told all the sons of Zerubbabel, and none of them are called Reza. So where on earth has Luke gotten this name? And this is something that both Luke and Matthew have in common. It's their departure from the Old Testament. Why doesn't Luke just incorporate all the names the Old Testament gives us? For instance, Luke has all these unknown names. Why doesn't he give us the names given in the Old Testament? For instance, the sons of Hananiah are given. So you can see here, the line is traced through Hananiah, and we're given all his sons all the way down to Illinois. So why doesn't Luke, and for Matthew, just incorporate the names given to us by the Old Testament? Why don't they do this? And again, we are left scratching our heads. We're left with just mere speculation. You know, if I was writing a genealogy of Jesus, I would just copy out exactly word for word what I saw in the Old Testament up until the point where I'm given no more names. And this is the point where I'm given no more names. So I would stop here, and then from here, I would consult another genealogy. Yet Luke, for whatever reason, instead of incorporating the Old Testament genealogy, just starts putting in his own names. Perhaps Luke has a source that gives another son of Zerubbabel, in this case, Reza. We're left again with speculation. We can't say anything too definitively here of whether or not this is a mistake. I'm inclined to say that the inclusion of Reza is not a mistake. I can't give it a tick, but the reason I wouldn't give it a cross is because perhaps we don't have all of Zerubbabel's sons. We gave Neri a cross because you can only have one father. You can only have one father. Is Shealtiel's father Neri or Jeconiah? It can only be one or the other. So there we have a pretty hard contradiction. But here, when it comes to Zerubbabel's son, although in 1 Chronicles chapter 3 we're given a list of Zerubbabel's sons, nothing eliminates the idea that perhaps that's not an extensive list.
I think when the crowd asked in Luke chapter 4, isn't this the carpenter's son? They know the cloud. They know the background of Joseph, and that's going to lead into my point about they know Joseph's genealogy. And they know Jesus, based on Joseph's genealogy, is disqualified from being through the lineage to be a Messiah. That's the case I'm about to make for you, okay?
Wow.
And it's an interesting case from Scripture, okay? So first of all, we see women checkered past. The second reason Matthew starts with the genealogy through the lineage of through the lineage of Joseph, okay, David, Joseph, is to get the elephant out of the room, or to identify the elephant in the room, which the elephant in the room is the people in Jesus's hometown, Galilee, Nazareth, knew that Joseph was not qualified to be his father through the lineage of David. Now, the question is how? How do I know that? Because it looks like in the text it says, David fathered Uriah, his wife, Solomon, Rehoboam, and then it goes down. The problem is called the Jeconiah problem. That's the problem.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of Jeconiah?
I haven't.
Okay. It's called the Jeconiah problem.
Jeconiah was like the Jewish Caligula in every way. Only thing is, Caligula lasted longer than he did. And the curse from Jeremiah 22, verse 30, is that none of his descendants would ever sit on the throne again. And just to make the point of how serious this was, he was carried off to Babylon, and his heir, which means the next person who was king after him, was not his son, but rather his uncle. So by having his uncle as the next king, it accomplished two things. His descendants no longer sat on the throne of David, as promised in Jeremiah, but yet his uncle, of course, his paternal uncle, is a direct descendant of David and Solomon. Whoever wrote the book of Matthew believe it or not, was keenly aware of this. Luke avoids this because Luke's genealogy goes through Nathan, the different son of David. But it's very striking that Matthew's genealogy, although we are promised in Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, that there are 3 sets of 14 generations, totaling 42 generations from Abraham until Jesus. As it turns out, 5 of them are removed. And 1 extra one is removed. So if you count all the generations, somebody removed 1 extra one, but they actually removed the father of Jeconiah rather than Jeconiah. That's a mistake when trying to corrupt the text. And that's why, so Jeconiah in Hebrew is Yehoiachin, and Jeconiah's father is Yehoiakim. They're virtually identical. So although after we're given the pile of names from Abraham all the way to Jesus, there are, and then in verse 17 we're told, we have 3 sets of 14, because David's name in Gematria adds up to 14, Daled Vav Daled 464. So it was a novel approach. Someone removed what he thought was an accursed name. Luke doesn't have this problem because Luke goes through the wrong son, goes through Nathan rather than Solomon. So it really is quite strange. But verse 11 of Matthew 1 has Jeconiah there, strikingly. So it's sort of a blunder, and therefore it's a cursed genealogy. And therefore, if this is in fact the genealogy of Jesus, then it not only doesn't demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah, which Matthew sets out in the opening passage, but demonstrates that he can't possibly be the Messiah because he comes from a cursed genealogy.
As I live, saith the Lord, though Coniah the son of Jehoiakim king of Judah were the signet upon my right hand, yet would I pluck thee thence. And I will give thee into the hand of them that seek thy life, and into the hand of them whose face thou fearest, even into the hand of Nebuchadrezzar king of Babylon, and into the hand of the Chaldeans. And I will cast thee out, and thy mother that bare thee, into another country, where ye were not born, and there shall ye die. But to the land whereunto they desire to return, thither shall they not return. Is this man Coniah a despised, broken idol? Is he a vessel wherein is no pleasure? Wherefore are they cast out, he and his seed, and are cast into a land which they know not? O earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, write ye this man childless, a man that shall not prosper in his days. For no man of his seed shall prosper, sitting upon the throne of David, and ruling any more in Judah.
Yeshua cannot be the Messiah because he comes through the cursed line of Jeconiah. That's very easy to refute. Jeremiah 22 says that he'll be cursed, that none of his sons will sit on the throne. Render him as childless. Now, genealogically, we know from the Hebrew Bible that he had children. But count him as childless because none of his sons will sit on the throne. All it's saying is, don't put your hopes in him. He's in exile, all right? The rest of the Jewish community, many of them were about to suffer exile. Temple's going to be destroyed. And God's saying, no, don't put your hope in him. He's not coming back to rule and reign. None of his sons, he's cursed. None of his sons are going to rule and reign. God says in Jeremiah 22, even if he were a signet ring on my hand, I would take him off. I would take him off and throw it away. I'd take this ring off, throw it away. Even if it was that close to me, that precious to me. Haggai 2 speaks this prophecy over Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel being the grandson of Jeconiah. And it says about him, I will make him a signet ring on my finger. In other words, I'm undoing the curse. I'm reversing the curse.
So in a sense, what Matthew's doing is this. Let me summarize it. Matthew is saying, listen, you know and we know that Joseph is not from the lineage of an endorsed member of the house of David. We all know that. But here's the reality. Jesus is not of Joseph at all.
Right.
In fact, Jesus is born of who?
Mary.
Now, how do I know that? You're going to love this.
Zerubbabel was likened to a signet ring, there's that imagery again, that God puts on his finger. And God commends and blesses Zerubbabel, and Haggai 2:23 saying, he is my signet ring put upon my finger, which would seem to reverse the curse placed on his grandfather Jeconiah, who is likened to a signet ring God would take off from his finger. Ultimately, though, in the end, and I'm going to read from my notes here. Ultimately, in the end, the curse of Jeconiah did not apply to Jesus because it was through Mary that he was the rightful heir to the Davidic throne by natural descent. Joseph was Jesus' foster father, but not his biological father. And Jeconiah's genealogical line with its divine curse was passed down only through natural descent to Joseph. And since God is the father of Jesus, he did not inherit the curse of Jeconiah in the end. So that problem then is solved. And this is how you can answer, and learned rabbis.
In the Hebrew text, it does not say that he would have, or that he would wear, or he would receive the signet ring. That's not what it says. It says he will be like unto one, declares the Lord. I will make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you. You're the one I've designated at this time to speak this message and to perform this task.
And I'm familiar with the apologist response to these, and they're not good responses, but it's worthwhile to bring them up, or else they're going to be in your comment section after the video, which is that, well, everyone knows that Zerubbabel was a leader within Israel after the exilic period, but they actually fails the test because it says in Jeremiah 22:30, none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on the throne of David and ruling again in Judah. And Zerubbabel was a governor, but he was never on a throne. He was never a king. He was never anointed as a king, as far as I'm aware, was he?
Exactly. Zerubbabel is a governor, and he's spoken of very highly in the book of Haggai. Like, I placed my signet ring on him. So this is really awkward. So as it turns out, this very wicked king has a great-great-grandson whose name is Zerubbabel, who's born in Babylon and rules as a governor along with Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok, who is the high priest. But he can't become king because of the curse, precisely.
And you touched on it before, but the fact that the lineage goes through Nathan in the book of Luke is a little bit problematic, because we've got a couple of declarations in the Old Testament basically saying that it's going to go through Solomon. So 1 Chronicles 22:9-10 says, behold, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all of his enemies all around. His name shall be Solomon, for I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name, and he shall be my son. I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. There's no promise to Nathan. It's always through Solomon.
Same thing in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12-16. And it does have to trace itself through King Solomon. King David had many other children, but the Bible tells us in 1 Chronicles 22, verse 9 and 10, the Bible tells us in 2 Samuel 12-16, Scripture tells us in 1 Chronicles 17, that it has to go through Solomon, not any one of the children. Well, as it turns out, Luke's genealogy, if you look at the 15th from Abraham, there is a distinction. Luke does go back to Adam, just so you understand. So we're just going to ignore that because Luke starts with Adam, Matthew doesn't. So Luke goes to Nathan, who's another child of David, not King Solomon. And therefore that violates Psalm 89, verse 29-38. Right straight there. It has to go through King Solomon. So Luke's genealogy is worthless. I mean, the problems are so staggering.